About 4 weeks ago, I got detained by 6 police officers and brought to the emergency room psych department. It was a Friday night, and I started having this type of panic attack that I could not control for the life of me, and so I finally just decided to cave and call the 988 crisis line. The employee who talked with me on the phone was actually really, really nice, really supportive. She helped me breathe through it, doing some grounding techniques. She obviously did her standard, safety questions, which is do you want to harm yourself or others? And I said no. After 30 minutes on the phone with her, I hang up and I just go about my evening. I'm hanging out with the dog, I'm watching Netflix, we're just chilling in bed. I made that call around 11 p.m. and ended the call at 11:30. And then around 1:15 in the morning, there's knocking. And I'm thinking in my head, oh, it's just the neighbors. This is not uncommon for them. And then the knocking gets intense. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what is going on? And then my dog starts growling. And I'm like, I think it's actually my front door that's knocking. I run to my bedroom window and I don't see anybody. I don't see any unusual cars. I don't see anybody. I can't see my front door because there's a patio or a front porch roof that blocks the front door from my view. So I'm like, I don't know what's going on or who's knocking at my front door. I creep downstairs and I look out the window and I'm like, oh my God, there's 3 police officers on my front porch and there's 3 more in my yard. So I open the door and I'm like, what is going on? They're like, did you make a call into the crisis line? And I was like, yeah. And they were like, okay, well, because of it, you are being detained and have to be brought to psych. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't need it. And they're like, well, and right when she says, well, this woman officer, some other lady walks up. And she's a crisis line worker, or not a crisis line worker, but she's a crisis mental health employee that works alongside with the police department. She walks up and she hands me these documents, and I'm looking at them, and they're court documents. I was court ordered to go to psych. At this point, I was just like, okay, because there's no fighting that. If I refused, I could have been handcuffed, which thankfully I was not handcuffed. They ended up just having an ambulance come to my house, and I looked at them, I was like, guys, it's 1:30 now in the morning, please don't wake up my neighbors. And I was like, can you make sure the ambulance lights are off? All the extra lights are off, which thankfully they agreed. The ambulance was actually pretty chill. I ended up just sitting on the side of the ambulance instead of in the gurney. I knew where the seatbelt was, so it wasn't too hard to just request to do that instead. They did basic blood pressure, heart rate and stuff, and I was fine. And then I got brought to the emergency room. Once I got brought into the psych section of the hospital, they ended up giving me the paper scrubs. They did a pat down and a metal detection wand, and they made me take my jewelry off and my rings off. I was able to keep my earrings and my nose piercing in. Once all of that was done, they then put me in what they call an observation pod. But really what these are is basically solitary confinement. There is no windows, there is no clock, there is a TV, but no matter how loud you make the TV, you still can't hear it because it's in this safe box. Once I got settled in there, the same lady that came to my front door came to the pods and gave me an evaluation, and in which case she was like, well, I'm recommending that you do 5-day inpatient. And I'm like, I don't need this. She's like, well, it's what my recommendation is. When she left my pod, that was the first of many panic attacks that I had in the pods. The first one was really just about that my dog was home alone and nobody was home to take care of her. So during my panic attack, I finally got one of the nurses to just get me my phone so I could call somebody to come to the hospital to pick up my keys and then to go back to my house to go and get my dog and her food and anything that they needed to be able to take care of her. During one of these panic attacks, one of the on-call RNs or nurse practitioners came by my pod, saw me panicking, and just looked at me and was like, that's not productive. Panicking isn't going to help you. You just have to accept that this is where you're at. Which, for the record, if somebody is having a panic attack and you tell them that it's not productive, you telling me that is what's not productive. They did provide 3 meals a day, but I, for those 48 hours, did not eat anything. I was so stressed that I could not eat anything. I did have a lot of apple juice though. That was really good. Then they start telling me that these like 2 inpatient treatment facilities local really want me, and I'm like, okay, great, let's just get these stupid 5 days over with. But then they kept coming back being like, so with your health stuff, like what kind of happens with your POTS? And so I'm explaining my POTS to them and what my symptoms look like and the fainting that I have occasionally with it. And then they're like, okay, well, these places aren't really sure if they can take you because you have POTS. And I was like, okay. And they're like, but we're still going to try and figure it out with these places and see what we can figure out. And I was like, okay. And then they come back again and they're like, well, they don't feel comfortable with you having the port. And I'm like, you guys can de-access my port. I have a port in my chest right here. There's a device under it and you stick a needle through to do fluids. And so they take the needle out and then go and try and find out if now I'd be accepted into one of those facilities. While they were trying to argue with these treatment facilities, I ended up just starting to sleep all the time. I just kept the lights off. There's no windows, so you really can't tell what day it is or what time it is, because there is no clock either. I said that in the beginning, but I literally just slept. I would wake up, go back to sleep, wake up, go back to sleep, wake up, go back to sleep. I remember one of the nurses coming in to do like my vitals, and I was like, hey, what time is it? And she was like, oh, it's 11. And I was like, 11 a.m. or 11 p.m. because I really had no idea. I had multiple panic attacks when in the pod. I have never been claustrophobic in my life until I was put into these pods. Like, this pod is enough for the hospital bed, and then 3 steps, and then you hit a wall. And then on the other end of like the foot of the bed, it was maybe like a foot of space to be able to just barely squeeze. It was a tiny pod. Then after what felt like forever, and probably was forever, or it could have been a few hours, I don't know, somebody came back to talk with me and they were like, so none of the treatment facilities want you because you're too medically complex, so there's not really anything we can do, and we're gonna send you home if you're okay to go home. She just said that to me and I just kind of laughed internally because I was like, you've got to be kidding me. I was okay to not be here. And if you guys really think that I need the 5-day inpatient, you guys are just sending me home now? What? And it's gotten me thinking, like, what if other people with chronic illness really truly need that 5-day inpatient and cannot get the inpatient because they're too medically complex? It doesn't make any sense. Well, anyway, that was my hospital emergency psych room. Anyways, that was my story. If you guys have any questions or want to know anything else, let me know in the comments.